For most of human history, punishment wasn't just about justice, it was about fear. The more terrifying the punishment, the stronger the message it sent to everyone watching. From public humiliation to methods almost impossible to imagine today, these punishments revealed just how far humanity once went in the name of order. The first punishment isn't a single method, it's an idea. Public humiliation. It sounds harmless compared to what comes later. But for centuries, your reputation was often more valuable than your possessions. One famous example was the pillory, a wooden frame locked around a person's head and hands, leaving them unable to move while the entire town gathered around them. People didn't just stare. They laughed, they insulted, they threw rotten vegetables, mud, and sometimes even stones. Hours felt like days. Days felt endless. The physical pain wasn't always the worst part. It was knowing that everyone you knew, your neighbors, your friends, even your family, could watch your dignity disappear. And this reminds us about the famous scene of Cersei Lannister in Game of Thrones. Just don't check in front of your parents. In other words, humiliation can literally hurt. Now imagine experiencing it in front of hundreds of people. Next comes a punishment that turned waiting into torture. The Brazen Bull. According to ancient Greek accounts, a sculptor created a life-sized bronze bull with a hollow interior. The condemned person was locked inside. A fire was lit underneath. As the metal slowly heated, the temperature rose little by little. The victim didn't know exactly when the heat would become unbearable. That uncertainty made every second worse. Whether every detail of the famous story is historically accurate remains debated among historians, but the Brazen Bull has survived for centuries as one of history's most infamous symbols of cruelty. Sometimes, legends survive because they reveal something about the people who tell them, not because every detail happened exactly as described. Our next punishment wasn't about speed, it was about making death as slow as possible. Impalement. This method became closely associated with Vlad III of Wallachia, better known as Vlad the Impaler. Historical records describe forests filled with impaled enemies stretching across the landscape. Visitors arriving from miles away would immediately understand the message. Do not challenge this ruler. Fear itself became a weapon. Historians continue debating the exact numbers and stories surrounding Vlad, but there is little disagreement that impalement became central to his reputation. Power wasn't just about winning battles. It was about convincing people resistance wasn't worth trying. Centuries later, psychologists would describe something similar. People don't simply respond to punishment, they respond to the expectation of punishment. Sometimes the fear becomes more powerful than the punishment itself. Then there was scaphism, an execution method described in ancient Persian sources. According to historical accounts, a prisoner was trapped between two boats or hollowed logs. They were force-fed milk and honey. The mixture attracted insects. Over time, exposure, infection, dehydration, and insects combined into an unimaginably slow death. Some historians question whether every reported detail is accurate, since many surviving descriptions come from Greek writers who were hostile toward Persia. That uncertainty matters. History isn't just about repeating shocking stories. It's also about asking where those stories came from and whether they were exaggerated for political purposes. Even if some details remain debated, the existence of such accounts reminds us how easily cruelty and propaganda can become intertwined. Now imagine punishment that followed you long after death. In medieval Europe, some people convicted of certain crimes weren't simply executed. Their bodies were displayed publicly afterward, sometimes hanging from city gates, sometimes placed in cages, sometimes left where travelers could see them for months. The purpose wasn't revenge against the dead. The audience was the living. Every person who passed by received the same silent message. This could be you. Modern criminology has repeatedly questioned whether extreme punishments actually reduce crime. Research over the past several decades has generally found little evidence that harsher penalties alone create safer societies. The certainty of being caught often matters more than the severity of the punishment itself. That idea has influenced many modern justice systems around the world. One of history's most feared punishments came from ancient Rome. Crucifixion. It wasn't reserved for ordinary citizens. It was often used against slaves, rebels, and those considered enemies of the state. The process was intentionally public. Roads leading into cities sometimes displayed rows of crosses. Travelers entering could immediately see what happened to those who challenged Roman authority. Roman philosopher Cicero described crucifixion as one of the cruelest penalties imaginable. It combined physical suffering with complete public degradation. Again, the message mattered just as much as the punishment itself. The government wasn't simply removing one individual. It was communicating with thousands. Another punishment relied on something even more terrifying: isolation. Some prisoners spent years alone in tiny cells with almost no human interaction. The idea seemed logical. Silence would encourage reflection. Instead, many prisoners experienced hallucinations, depression, anxiety, and severe psychological distress. Today, researchers continue studying the effects of prolonged solitary confinement. Many psychologists argue that extended isolation can permanently damage mental health. Sometimes invisible wounds become deeper than visible ones. Here's something surprising. As horrifying as these punishments sound, many people living at the time believed they were necessary. Why? Because crime was frightening. Governments had limited police forces. Communication was slow. Courts were inconsistent. Leaders believed terrifying punishments created order. Whether that belief was correct is another question entirely. History often teaches us that people can sincerely believe they're protecting society while committing extraordinary cruelty. It raises an uncomfortable question. How many things accepted today will seem shocking hundreds of years from now? The evolution of justice didn't happen overnight. During the 18th century, thinkers like Cesare Beccaria began arguing that punishment should be proportionate, predictable, and focused on preventing future crime instead of satisfying revenge. His 1764 book on crimes and punishments became one of the foundations of modern criminal justice reform. His central argument was surprisingly simple. Cruelty doesn't automatically create justice. That idea spread across Europe and beyond. Legal systems slowly changed. Not perfectly. Not everywhere. But gradually. Today, most countries emphasize due process, legal rights, evidence, and proportional sentencing, even though debates about justice continue. History reminds us that progress is rarely automatic. Every generation decides what kind of justice it believes in. Looking back at these punishments isn't about feeling morally superior to people who lived centuries ago. It's about recognizing what fear can convince ordinary societies to accept. The people cheering in medieval town squares weren't monsters. They were neighbors, parents, shopkeepers, people who believed public suffering kept everyone else safe. That's what makes history unsettling. It doesn't separate humanity into good people and bad people. It shows how culture, fear, politics, and power can reshape what ordinary people consider normal. The worst punishments in history weren't just methods of execution. They were messages. Messages written in pain. Messages designed to control entire populations. Thankfully, many societies have moved away from those ideas. But the larger question remains just as relevant today. Should justice exist to make people suffer? Or should it exist to build a safer society? The answer to that question continues to shape laws, governments, and human rights around the world. And history reminds us why it's a question worth asking.